After finding out I was excluded from wedding guest list I sponsored, I canceled all payments, and now my daughter begging for financial help. Be me, successful tech consultant in Austin. 20 years. That's how long I've been with Rachel. Met her when I was 37. Had finally made it after years of grinding in my career. Could finally relax and enjoy life. Then Rachel walked into my life. Single mom with young daughter Sophie. Sophie was 8 at the time. Rachel was smart, funny, had this special charm. Thought she just needed a break in life. Little did I know I'd be handing out breaks left and right. While they just took advantage. When we first got together, I didn't mind stepping up. Sophie needed a new mountain bike. Done. Rachel wanted to finish her master's degree. Covered her tuition without hesitation. Wasn't trying to buy their affection. Just wanted to help out. Figured if I was going to be with Rachel, couldn't ignore Sophie. Thought maybe I could be a positive influence in her life. As time went on, ended up doing way more than expected. Private school for Sophie. Paid for all extracurriculars. New MacBooks every couple years. International trips with her classmates. All on me. When Sophie wanted some limited edition Valentino prom dress. Cost more than my first Audi. Didn't even hesitate. Why not? Thought I was building something with Rachel and Sophie. Wanted them to have the best. Problem was, never felt like part of the family. Sophie was polite, sure. But always distant. Would give that fake smile when getting gifts. Then disappear to her room. Not even a thank you. Rachel would brush it off. Teenagers are just like that. Started to wear on me. Still figured it would get better as Sophie got older. By the time she hit college, was paying over $85,000 for her private education. Rachel said it was an investment in Sophie's future. I agreed at the time. Wanted Sophie to have opportunities I never had. When she graduated last year, surprised her with a brand new Range Rover Sport, midnight black, fully loaded with every possible option. Sophie was thrilled. Gave me the first genuine hug I'd gotten from her in years. For a moment, thought maybe I was finally getting through to her. Fast forward to now. Sophie's engaged to some guy named Marcus. He's decent enough, I guess. Works in hedge fund management. Comes from old money family. Seems to genuinely care about her. Rachel was over the moon about the engagement. Constantly gushing about how Sophie was set for life. Kept saying things like, Marcus is such a good match for her. He's so stable. Wedding planning started almost immediately. Rachel treating it like the social event of the decade. We're talking about a Lake Tahoe resort venue. Custom farm-to-table menu. Live orchestra. The works, guest list pushing 400 people. Every single detail screamed luxury. Naturally, I was footing the bill. Why? Because I could afford it. And I wanted Sophie to have her dream wedding. Or so I thought. Little things started nagging at me during the planning. Sophie and Rachel would have these planning sessions. I wasn't invited. It's just girl stuff, Rachel would say. Waving me off? When I suggested inviting a few of my close friends, Rachel gave me this look. Said the guest list was already so tight. Tight? There were 400 people on that list. But apparently no room for people who'd been in my corner for decades. Let's talk about David. This guy is the definition of a deadbeat. If there was a hall of fame for absent fathers, his face would be front and center. Been with Rachel for 20 years. Can count on one hand how many times David showed up for Sophie. And when I say showed up, don't mean he came through in any meaningful way. Just drops in, throws around some half-assed compliments, vanishes before the dishes are clean. The thing that gets me, though, is how Sophie sees him. To her, David is some kind of superhero. When she was younger, she'd run to the door yelling, "Dad's here!" like he was Santa Claus himself. Meanwhile, I was there every single day, making sure she had everything she needed. Don't know what fairy tale she's telling herself? Reality is David hasn't contributed a single penny to her life. No child support, no birthday presents, not even a dollar store card. One time Rachel told me David had a rough patch after the divorce. Apparently poor guy needed space to figure things out. Space? He didn't need space. He needed a job and a reality check. But Rachel, being Rachel, never pushed him. Made excuses for him like it was her second career. He's still her dad, she'd say. Like that gave him a free pass to do absolutely nothing. What really burns me up is how David shows up just enough to keep Sophie hooked. He's not completely out of the picture. Oh no, that would make too much sense. Instead, he breezes in a couple times a year, just often enough to keep the cool dad image alive. Takes Sophie out to some chain restaurant, Olive Garden or some shit, gives her some vague life advice, then disappears for months. And every time, Sophie comes back beaming. Like she just had dinner with Tony Robbins. Don't even get me started on Rachel's role in all this. She's always made sure David had a seat at the table, figuratively and literally. One time he called after a solid year of silence, said he wanted to see Sophie. Rachel practically rolled out the red carpet, cooked this huge Italian feast, made sure Sophie was all dressed up, even asked me to step out for the evening. so they could have family time. I'll admit that one stung, but I played along. Didn't want to be the bad guy. Figured if Sophie needed David in her life, I wasn't going to stand in the way. Thought I was being the bigger person. In hindsight, I was just being a sucker. The thing is, David doesn't even try to pretend he's involved. Not showing up at Sophie's school events. Not helping her move into her college dorm. Didn't chip in for tuition, books, or anything else. But somehow, he gets to waltz into her life. Be dad with a capital D. While I'm just what? The guy who pays for everything? The glorified ATM? It's insulting. One time I tried to bring this up with Rachel. Told her how it feels like I'm doing all the heavy lifting, while David gets all the praise. She gave me this tired look, like she'd heard it all before. You're overthinking it. Sophie loves you. David's just David. What does that even mean? David's just David. Is that supposed to justify his complete lack of effort? I let it go. Because arguing with Rachel about David is like trying to teach a fish to ride a bicycle. Pointless. And now the wedding. When Sophie announced she was engaged, I was genuinely happy for her. Thought this is my chance to really be part of something special. The worst part was the wedding invitation. When they arrived, I opened mine expecting to see my name. Somewhere, anywhere. But nope, there it was in black and white. David Reynolds, father of the bride. Not a mention of me. I didn't even get a footnote. It was like I didn't exist. Thought about confronting Sophie about it. But honestly, what would be the point? She'd just tell me it was a mistake, or that it wasn't a big deal. But it was a big deal. It was a huge deal. I've spent better part of 2 decades trying to be a good stepdad, only to be completely erased when it mattered most. And David, oh, he was loving every second of it. Caught him grinning like the cat that ate the canary. When Rachel mentioned the father-daughter dance, I wanted to wipe that smug look off his face, but I kept my cool. Barely. At this point, it's not even about the money. Don't care about the tens of thousands I've spent on Sophie's life. I care about the principle. It's not fair. And it's not right. Then comes the night when everything changed. It was a Friday night. I organized this fancy dinner at Le Bernardin, one of the most exclusive restaurants in town. Spared no expense. Private dining room. Custom tasting menu with dishes I couldn't even pronounce. Personal sommelier for the evening. Personalized service for all of us. I figured this is a celebration of Sophie's wedding, and I'm happy to do it for the family. Little did I know, this dinner would be the final nail in the coffin. Everyone was there. Rachel. Sophie. David. Sophie's fiancé Marcus. Marcus's parents, Linda and Robert. To me, it was a way of showing support and goodwill. Wanted everyone to feel like part of a team. Like we were all coming together for Sophie's big day. Still clinging to this naive idea that I was part of the family. Big mistake? The night started off fine. Or at least I thought so. The drinks were flowing. I don't drink, but everyone else was enjoying themselves. The food looked incredible. The mood seemed light. Marcus's parents were polite, making small talk about the wedding plans and how lovely the Lake Tahoe venue was. Sophie was glowing, talking about her dress fittings and flower arrangements. David was sitting there like he owned the place, leaning back in his chair, with that smug look I've grown to hate. I tried to keep things light, chatting with Marcus about his work in hedge funds and asking Linda and Robert about their summer plans. Rachel was doing her usual thing, hovering around David, making sure he had everything he needed, acting like he was some kind of VIP. I brushed it off, because honestly, I just wanted the night to go smoothly. Then Sophie stood up. She clinked her glass, signaling she wanted to make a toast. I sat back, expecting some heartfelt words about family and gratitude. Instead, she says, I just want to thank everyone for being here tonight. This is such a special time for me and Marcus, and I'm so lucky to have all of you in my life. Okay, not a bad start. I was waiting for her to say something about me, maybe a nod to the guy paying for everything. But no, she turned to David and said, I'm especially grateful to my dad. He's been my rock, and I'm so excited that he'll be walking me down the aisle. The table erupted in applause. David leaned back, smirking, like he'd just been handed the keys to the city. Rachel was clapping and smiling, like she'd just witnessed a miracle. Even Marcus's parents were nodding along, like this was some heartwarming family moment. Meanwhile, I sat there in stunned silence, gripping my fork so tight, I thought it might snap. I don't even know how to describe what I was feeling. Betrayed, angry, humiliated, probably all of the above. Here I was, hosting this lavish dinner, paying for every last detail of Sophie's wedding, and this is how I get treated. Like I'm invisible. When the applause died down, I stood up. Wasn't planning to make a scene, but I couldn't just sit there and take it. I raised my glass and said, well, if David is walking you down the aisle, then David can pay for the wedding. I'm out. You could have heard a pin drop. The look on Sophie's face was priceless. Her jaw literally dropped. Rachel looked like she'd just seen a ghost. Marcus froze mid-sip. His parents exchanged awkward glances. David, for the first time all night. He wasn't smirking. He looked like someone had yanked the rug out from under him. I didn't wait for anyone to respond. Set my glass down, threw my napkin on the table, and walked out. Could feel everyone's eyes on me as I left. But I didn't care. I'd had enough. When I got home, I sat down in the living room, trying to process what had just happened. 20 years of bending over backward for Rachel and Sophie. And this is what it came to. They didn't just take me for granted. They outright disrespected me. David, the guy who's done nothing for Sophie her entire life, gets to be the star, while I'm treated like an afterthought. It was infuriating. Rachel came home about an hour later. I heard her keys jangling in the door, braced myself for the inevitable confrontation. Sure enough, she stormed into the living room, her face red with anger. "What the hell was that?" she demanded. I looked at her, completely calm, and said, "That was me finally standing up for myself. You embarrassed Sophie in front of everyone." She shot back, "You couldn't have picked a worse time to make a scene." "A scene?" I laughed bitterly. The scene was Sophie thanking David for being her rock, while I sat there like a damn fool. "And you let this happen?" Rachel rolled her eyes. "Oh, stop being so dramatic. David's her father. This is what she wants. And what about what I want, Rachel? Does that matter? Or am I just the guy who pays for everything?" She didn't have an answer for that. Instead, she turned the argument around, accusing me of ruining Sophie's big day and making it all about myself. I just shook my head. There was no point in arguing with her. She didn't get it, and she never would. That night I made a decision. I wasn't going to let them use me anymore. After that Friday night dinner fiasco, I woke up the next morning feeling oddly calm. Maybe it was the kind of calm that comes with clarity. I wasn't stewing over it, wasn't second-guessing myself. I just knew exactly what needed to be done. If David wanted to play the role of dad so badly, he could have the whole package. Let him handle the stress, the logistics, and most importantly, the checkbook. I was officially out. First thing I did, sat down at my computer, logged into the joint account Rachel and I shared, moved every cent I had put in for Sophie's wedding into my personal account. Not going to lie, it felt good. I even double-checked to make sure everything was secure. Rachel didn't work. Hadn't for years. And I wasn't about to let her siphon off money for a wedding I was no longer funding. Next, I grabbed my phone, started making calls. First up was the caterer. I'd hired this high-end catering company. The food alone was costing me close to $25,000. I explained the situation to the manager. Something about unforeseen circumstances. I didn't feel like airing my dirty laundry to a stranger. Surprisingly, they were cool about it. Since the wedding was still a few months away, they agreed to cancel without any penalties. Full refund. One down. Many more to go. Then, there was the venue. This was the big one. Beautiful place, sure, but also ridiculously expensive. I think the deposit alone was around $15,000. When I called, the event coordinator sounded annoyed, like I'd personally ruined her day by canceling. She explained that the deposit was non-refundable, which I already knew. Fine, keep your $15,000. It was worth losing that chunk of change. To get out of this mess, while I was on hold with the venue, I glanced at my car keys sitting on the counter and had an idea. Sophie's Range Rover. I'd given her that car after she graduated college, thinking it was a nice gesture for all her hard work. In reality, she'd barely passed, and I'd probably spent more time arranging her graduation party than she spent studying. But whatever, I bought her the car because I thought it would make her happy. Now though, that car was mine. It was in my name, and there was no way I was letting her keep it. After everything that happened, I logged onto a car selling app, posted it right then and there. Within a few hours, I had a buyer lined up. By the end of the week, the Range Rover was gone, and I had an extra $65,000 in my pocket. You know what? It felt great. After the venue, I called the photographer. This was another expensive booking because Sophie and Rachel insisted on hiring some award-winning artist who didn't just take photos, but captured memories. Whatever that means, the guy was surprisingly understanding. He even said he had a wait list of couples who'd been hoping to snag my date, so he was happy to refund the deposit. I spent the rest of the day going down the list of vendors, the florist with her exotic flower arrangements, the 12-piece orchestra, the artisan cake designer from France. Every phone call was another small victory. Most of them were polite. A few were annoyed, but I didn't care. By the end of the day, I'd clawed back nearly $40,000. Sure, I lost a few deposits along the way, but considering how much the whole wedding was going to cost, it was a small price to pay. For my peace of mind, while I was handling all this, Rachel was suspiciously quiet. She knew I was upset after the dinner, but I don't think she realized just how serious I was. She didn't ask me what I was doing or where I was going, which was unusual for her. Normally, she was all up in my business. But now, radio silence. I think she assumed I'd cool down after a day or two, and things would go back to normal. By the time Rachel finally confronted me, I was already halfway through, dismantling Sophie's dream wedding. She found me sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of papers, contracts, receipts, bank statements. "What's all this?" she asked, her voice sharp. "I'm canceling the wedding," I said. Without looking up, her jaw practically hit the floor. "You're what?" "You heard me," I said, finally meeting her eyes. "I'm not paying for a wedding where I'm treated like an outsider. If David wants to be the big man, let him step up for once." She stared at me, speechless. For a moment, I thought she might start crying, but then her face hardened. "You can't just do this. Sophie's counting on you." "Is she?" I shot back. "Because from where I'm sitting, it seems like she's counting on David." Rachel started to argue, throwing out every excuse in the book. "You're overreacting," she said. "This is about Sophie's happiness, not you. You're being selfish." Selfish. That word hit me like a slap in the face. I'd spent 20 years putting their needs ahead of my own, giving them everything they wanted without asking for much in return. And now, when I finally stood up for myself, I was the selfish one. I stood up, towering over her. "Selfish? Let me tell you what selfish looks like. Selfish is erasing me from Sophie's life. While I pay for everything, selfish is letting David waltz in and take credit for things he didn't do. If you think I'm selfish, maybe you should take a good look in the mirror." Rachel stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. I could hear her pacing upstairs, probably calling Sophie, to vent about how unreasonable I was being. Let them complain. I didn't care anymore. The next morning, I woke up early, poured myself a cup of coffee, and went back to work. I called the string quartet and canceled their booking. They were disappointed but polite, and I got most of my money back. I emailed the company, making the custom wedding invitations, told them to stop production. They hadn't printed anything yet, so they refunded the full amount. By the time I was done, the wedding was essentially dismantled. No venue, no caterer, no orchestra, no cake, and no Range Rover sitting in Sophie's driveway. It was like the wedding had never existed, and honestly, it felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Rachel didn't say much after that. She spent most of her time in the guest room. Avoiding me, Sophie started blowing up my phone with texts, accusing me of ruining her life. I didn't respond to any of them. I was done being their doormat, and I wasn't about to apologize for taking back control of my own life. When the last vendor confirmed the cancellation, I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair, feeling something I hadn't felt in years: peace. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't being pulled in 100 different directions. I wasn't trying to make everyone happy. At my own expense, I was finally free. You'd think after canceling the wedding, they'd get the message that I was done. But no. The moment the dust started settling, the begging began. First it was Sophie, then Rachel, and eventually even David decided to throw his hat into the ring. Let me tell you, watching them scramble was equal parts satisfying and pathetic. It started with Sophie. A few days after I pulled the plug, she texted me. No apology, no acknowledgement of how things had played out. Just straight to the guilt trip. "I don't understand why you're punishing me. I just wanted my dad involved in my wedding. Can't you be happy for me?" I stared at my phone, trying to decide if it was worth replying. Punishing her? Seriously? I was the one who had paid for her entire lifestyle. And now I was punishing her? Yeah, no, I didn't bother replying. I wasn't in the mood for a back and forth, where I'd be painted as the bad guy, no matter what I said. A few hours later, she tried again. "Can we please talk about this? You're making everything so stressful for me. This is supposed to be the happiest time of my life." Stressful. Oh, now she was stressed. Again, I ignored her. If she wanted to talk, she could start by acknowledging her role in all this. But of course, that never happened. The next day, Rachel decided to chime in. She cornered me in the kitchen. While I was making coffee, her arms crossed, and her face set in that familiar, "I'm right and you're wrong" expression she'd perfected over the years. "We need to talk," she said. I sighed. "About what?" "You know what," she snapped. "You're ruining Sophie's wedding. Do you have any idea how upset she is? She's been crying nonstop since you canceled everything." "Good. I said flatly. Maybe she'll finally appreciate everything I've done for her. Rachel looked at me, like I'd just grown a second head. You can't be serious. You're acting like a child? This isn't about you. It's about Sophie. And yet, I said. Leaning against the counter, I was the one paying. So yeah, it is about me. That set her off. She launched into this long-winded rant about how I was being selfish, how I was letting my pride ruin what should have been a happy occasion, and how I was tearing the family apart. I let her go on for a bit, mostly because I wanted to see how far she'd take it. But when she started crying, yes, the crocodile tears made an appearance. I cut her off. Rachel, let me ask you something, I said, keeping my voice calm. Where was this energy when Sophie decided to write me out of the wedding? She opened her mouth to respond, but I held up my hand. No, don't answer. Because we both know the truth. You didn't care then, and you don't care now. All you care about is me paying for the wedding, so you and Sophie can keep pretending. David is some amazing dad? She didn't say anything. She just stared at me, her face a mix of anger and something that almost looked like guilt. Almost, I'm done, I said. Turning back to my coffee. You want a wedding? Figure it out yourself. As a family? Rachel stormed out of the kitchen, slamming the door behind her. I figured that would be the end of it, but I underestimated just how desperate they were. A day later, David called. Yes, David decided to weigh in. When I saw his name pop up on my phone, I almost didn't answer. But out of curiosity, I picked up. Hello. Hey man, he said. His voice annoyingly casual, like we were old buddies. Listen, I heard about what happened, and I just wanted to talk. About what? I asked. Already annoyed. Well, about the wedding, he said. Look, I get that you're upset, but don't you think you're overreacting a bit? I actually laughed. Overreacting, David? You've been a dad in name only for 20 years, and now you're telling me how I should feel? He ignored that and kept going. I know I haven't been as involved as I could have been, but this isn't about us. It's about Sophie. She's devastated, man. Can't you just let it go for her sake? Let it go. The audacity of this guy. I'd spent years cleaning up his messes, and now he had the nerve to tell me to let it go. David, let me make something clear, I said. My voice steady. You wanted to play dad? Great. Step up and be a dad for once. Otherwise, don't bother calling me again. There was a long pause on the other end, and for a moment, I thought he might actually step up. But no, of course not. Instead, he muttered something about doing my best and hung up. Typical. The final act in this circus came a few days later when Sophie showed up at the house. She looked tired, like she hadn't slept in days, but I wasn't about to let that guilt me into caving. I just don't understand why you're doing this, she said, her voice trembling. You've always been there for me. Why are you turning your back on me now? I crossed my arms and looked at her. Sophie, let me ask you something. When you decided to write me out of your wedding, no mention in the invites, no father-daughter dance, nothing. Did you ever stop to think about how that would make me feel? She didn't answer. She just looked down at her hands, fidgeting with the strap of her Gucci purse. I tried so hard, with all I could, to be a father to you, I continued. I've wanted to make sure you live the best life, and yet, when it really mattered, you chose David. That's okay. It's up to you. But don't expect anything from me. She started crying, but I didn't budge. I'd given her every opportunity to make things right, and she'd chosen to ignore them. This was the bed she'd made, and now she had to lie in it. When she left, I felt a weird mix of emotions. Part of me was sad. It's not easy to watch someone you care about walk out of your life, but mostly, I felt relieved. It didn't take long. After the begging tour, for the final blow to land, I thought they might finally get the hint. After Sophie's meltdown at the house, but nope, they weren't done yet. If anything, the silence that followed felt more like the calm before the storm. A week passed without a word from Rachel, Sophie, or David. Honestly, I thought it was over. I started settling into my new normal, working, relaxing, and enjoying the peace that came from not dealing with their drama every day. But of course, that couldn't last. One Thursday afternoon, I was at work, going over some client proposals, when my phone buzzed. I almost ignored it, but something made me glance at the screen. The number wasn't saved in my contacts, but it looked vaguely familiar. Against my better judgment, I picked up. Hello. Hey, it's David. Of course it was David. I leaned back in my chair, already bracing for whatever nonsense he was about to throw at me. "What do you want, David?" "Look, man," he started, his voice overly casual. "I know things have been rough lately, and I hate to be the one to bring this up, but we've got a problem." "We?" I said, raising an eyebrow. "What's this we you're talking about?" There was a pause on the other end, and I could almost hear the wheels turning in his head. "Look, I get it," he said finally. "But the thing is, I can't afford it. Sophie and Rachel are counting on you." "Not my problem," I said bluntly. He started to argue, but I hung up before he could get another word in. I didn't have time for his nonsense, and honestly, I had already wasted enough of my life cleaning up after him. That night, Rachel decided it was her turn to make a last-ditch effort. I was in the living room, flipping through channels, when she walked in, holding a letter. Her face was tight, like she was trying to hold it together. "What's that?" I asked. Not even looking up. "It's from Sophie," she said quietly. "She asked me to give it to you." I glanced at the envelope, but didn't move to take it. What does she want now? "She's sorry," Rachel said, sitting down on the couch across from me. "She knows she hurt you, and she wants to make things right." I raised an eyebrow. "Does she?" Because the last time I checked, her idea of making things right was asking me to pay for a wedding. I've been cut out of... Lisa sighed, her shoulders slumping. "Can you just read it? Please." Reluctantly, I took the envelope and opened it. The letter was handwritten, which surprised me. I figured Sophie would just text me again, but I guess she thought this would feel more personal. The letter was long, too. Long, honestly, and full of the usual excuses. "I'm sorry if I made you feel like you weren't part of the family. I didn't mean to exclude you. I just wanted to honor my dad. This wedding means everything to me, and I can't do it without your help." It was the same nonsense I'd heard 100 times before, just dressed up in fancier words. Nowhere in that letter did she take real responsibility for how she treated me. Nowhere did she acknowledge that I'd been the one supporting her. All these years, while David coasted, it was just another attempt to guilt me into caving. When I finished reading, I set the letter down and looked at Rachel. If this is her idea of an apology, she's got a lot to learn. "She's trying," Rachel said weakly. "She just wants her wedding back." "Well, she can keep wanting," I said, standing up. "And if you think I'm going to change my mind, you're wasting your time." Rachel didn't argue. She just sat there, staring at the floor. For a moment, I almost felt bad for her. But then I remembered all the times she'd let David walk all over me. All the times she'd put his feelings and Sophie's wants ahead of mine. Whatever sympathy I might have felt evaporated. The next day, I heard that the wedding was officially canceled. Sophie had apparently tried to downsize, hoping Marcus's family would step in to cover the costs, but they weren't having it. From what I heard, the whole thing turned into a massive fight, and Marcus's parents pulled their support entirely. Rachel moved out a week later, taking whatever little she could carry. Thanks to the prenup, I could go on with the divorce. Without her getting a dime out of me, I changed the locks, cleared out the joint accounts, and started rebuilding my life. I blocked them from everywhere, changed my number, deleted their emails, unfriended mutual contacts. Don't want anything that ties me with this nonsense family. Let David handle their drama. I was done, and let me tell you, it felt amazing.